So at the start of May, IGN released an article called Nintendo Switch 2 vs Steamdeck, Battle of the Handhelds. And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to guess why I am responding to this particular article. If you guys have been paying attention to IGN over the last however many years they've been on YouTube, they're fairly infamous for their very questionable takes on things. But it's hilarious to see game journalists chip in on the whole console versus PC thing, because obviously PCs are an open market. You know, game journalists can't get free handjobs from PC gaming, and as a result, usually they are more biased towards console gaming, which is what we're going to be looking at in this video. Compare that to someone like me, where I am not sponsored by Nintendo, nor am I getting a Nintendo Switch 2 early, or even a Nintendo Switch 2 at all. I have no intention of buying this because it isn't going to offer me anything that the Steam Deck doesn't already offer. But let's begin. The Nintendo Switch 2 Direct finally revealed exactly what the Nintendo Switch 2 can do and what it costs, but alongside the hype came the burden of realization. Consoles are getting expensive. Well, if you weren't around for the PS5 Pro situation, that is. The Switch 2's price has breached into the realm of what I'd expect from handheld gaming PCs, which cost anywhere from $400 to $900. But it's not just the hardware that's more expensive, the games are getting more expensive too, making the affordability of the original Switch a distant dream. I've always resented the idea that the Nintendo Switch was an affordable option. Like, yeah, if we're looking at the Switch itself and nothing else, then yeah, it's generally a cheaper or maybe even the cheapest gaming option compared to things like the Xbox Series X and the PS5. But everything else surrounding the Switch's ecosystem is just incredibly expensive. If we're talking about the Nintendo exclusive games, it's like barely any of them have dropped in market price. Like, there are games that came out well before the Xbox Series X and PS5 where they still cost full price. I think it's really dishonest to say that Nintendo Switch was affordable when the only affordable part of it was the Switch itself. Everything else was crazy expensive. Compared to the Steam Deck, which was once a far more expensive option than the Switch, Valve's handheld gaming PC and the Nintendo Switch 2 are in a similar lane, so if you're looking to get into a handheld gaming scene, which is better, Nintendo Switch 2 or Steam Deck? Yeah, these handhelds aren't in a similar lane at all. The Nintendo Switch 2 is a games console and a handheld hybrid, and it is locked to all of the bullshit that comes with the console ecosystem. The Steam Deck, on the other hand, is a gaming handheld, a handheld PC, and technically a games console as well if you get the optional docking station for it. However, the Steam Deck is part of the PC ecosystem, meaning that, generally speaking, you get most or all of the benefits that come with PC gaming. These products are not the same, nor were they made for the same audience. I think it's really stupid to bring that up. Point 1 is price. Price has been a hot topic for the Nintendo Switch 2. The company plans to launch the console at $450 unless you live in Japan, in which case it's $350, and it's region locked to Japan because why the fuck not, the greedy cunts? Which is 50% more expensive than the original $299 Switch. That itself is a drastic price leap. But there's the added possibility of it getting even higher with the threat of tariffs on the horizon. Pre-orders for the Switch 2 were delayed from their original April 9th date in the US, with Nintendo telling us that it was in order to assess the potential impact of tariffs and evolving market conditions. The 90-day tariff pause put a temporary stop to that, with pre-orders going live on April 24th, but there's no saying what happens when tariffs return in July. It's hard to make definitive statements on value as a result, but let's move forward with the prices we know. I think it's a really bad idea to confuse value with price, because price is 50% more expensive than the Switch was at launch by your own admission. And for that price, you're only getting Nintendo games, basically, because we all know what Nintendo feels about regarding emulation and mods. Not to mention that this 2025 Nintendo hardware has caught up to the performance metrics that were promised with the 2020 Xbox Series X and PS5, meaning that it's inevitable that AAA games are eventually going to skip the Switch 2 altogether, just how some AAA games skipped over the original Switch as well because of the limitations in the hardware. You're having to pay extra for the graphical upgrades on, Switch games that you already owned. You're having to pay to play your games online. You're having to pay for that shitty version of Discord that Nintendo marketed. And generally speaking, you're going to be paying way more money for the games, what few games you have, because obviously Nintendo Switch 2 has far less games than the Steam Deck does. It's a really bad idea to confuse value with price. The Steam Deck starts at $400 for the 256GB LCD model, barely undercutting the Switch 2. The 512GB and 1TB OLED models are $549 and $649 respectively, so it quickly gets more expensive. The price of hardware isn't all you should consider though. Software costs ramp up quickly, and Nintendo has taken a leap with the Switch 2 by raising the ceiling in AAA game pricing. Mario Kart World at $80 is the prime example, setting a new precedent for the future. There is no telling what Steam game prices will look like in the coming years, but as it currently stands, the deck pulls ahead of the Switch 2 with a lower starting cost and more affordable game library. Yeah, it's funny that you talk about Steam game prices, since generally speaking, Steam will always have cheaper games than Nintendo, either by having the same or a cheaper launch price and having way better deals overall. It's really bad to even bring up Steam prices when we're talking about Nintendo. Point 2. Nintendo Switch 2 versus Steam Deck, specs and performance. According to an Nvidia blog post, Switch 2 features 10 times the graphics of its predecessor, not very difficult to achieve and not exactly a bragging right, considering its predecessor was inferior to 2013 consoles. With ray tracing capability, variable refresh rate via Nvidia G-Sync, and AI-driven enhancements. Neither Nintendo or Nvidia have revealed the specs of the GPU, but it's incredibly likely that the system will be these specific chips on screen. I fucking love this. According to Nvidia, the Switch 2 features 10 times the graphics. Oh, but Nvidia haven't revealed the specs of the GPU. 10 times the graphics, they haven't revealed the specs of the GPU, yet you're saying it's incredibly likely that they're telling the truth. I wonder if you're coming across as a little bit biased in this article. This GPU is supposedly built on Ampera, the same graphics architecture behind the RTX 3080. Again, you're saying it's supposedly built on that, like where's the concrete proof? It's nowhere near as powerful as the other Nvidia GPUs in its series, as even the RTX 3050 Mobile, which is the weakest in its line and likely runs with a much higher power budget. The Nvidia GPU is powering a 7.9-inch 1920 by 1080 screen with 120Hz LCD touchscreen with variable refresh rate. Whilst the panel is a massive upgrade in size and resolution, it would have been nice if OLED came sooner rather than later. It has 256GB of universal flash storage with a micro SD express slot open for an additional 2TB. So again, Nvidia say it has 10 times the graphics of its predecessor. They've also not confirmed or revealed the specs of the GPU, but you believe them anyways. Also, if you've been paying attention to consoles recently, specs are irrelevant if the games don't run at the performance metrics that are promised to you. Like, the PlayStation 5 Pro, on paper at least, is the most powerful games console of all time. However, there are games like Alan Wake 2 which run at 860p on the PlayStation 5 Pro. It's a really bad idea to just say, oh, this product have X amount of stats, therefore it's objectively better than another product. Especially since it's not even guaranteed that it does have those specs. The Steam Deck is built on much older tech. Well, yeah, no shit, it came out in 2022. Because these GPUs are built on different architectures by different companies, it's incredibly hard to draw comparisons between the two. But because the Nintendo Switch 2 features hardware that the Steam Deck simply doesn't, the Switch 2 is theoretically more powerful. Theoretical is the key word here. These are different machines in operating system, power output, and display resolution, and with some form of DLSS coming to the Switch 2, we won't know for sure how it truly performs until it's in my hands. For now though, the Switch 2 seems likely to pull ahead. Winner, Nintendo Switch 2. So, Nvidia have not confirmed the specs of the thing, you have no idea how it will truly perform, but just because it is theoretically more powerful and it has better specs on paper at least, you're going to give it the point and the W. To hopefully prove my point a little bit, let's look at how Cyberpunk 77 runs on the Switch 2.
However, is it actually 1080p and 720p, or is DRS in play, as we saw from the footage? And the answer is that yes, DRS is in play, quite obviously. They don't want to go into specifics here, except they did say that scaling can range from 2x and up per axis, which effectively confirms that it's going to be a 540p to 1080p range for those 1080p modes, and it'll be like 360p to 720p on that 720p 40 handheld. So
the first part of that said they are targeting 1080p in docked mode for the Nintendo Switch 2 and 720p in handheld mode, or in other words, the exact same performance metrics of the original Switch. So genuinely, what is the point of this? And hilariously enough, Cyberpunk 2077, and I'm going to be showing gameplay comparing the PS5 and the Nintendo Switch 2 respectively, the gameplay looks comparable, if not slightly worse, to consoles that came out in 2020. And this is a piece of hardware coming out this year, keep in mind, which should hopefully prove just how outdated the Switch 2 specs actually are for modern performance standards. Make no mistake, on paper at least, it has better specs than the Steamdeck, but I'd be very careful saying that it is definitively better, especially since you yourself don't even know for certain how good it's going to be until you get it. But now we have the final part, and this is just absolutely fucking stupid. Software and features, this should be fun. Steamdeck and Nintendo Switch 2 were intended for a different audience, so directly comparing features can be confusing. If you're primarily a PC gamer with a large Steam library or have a penchant for emulation, the Steam Deck is a fantastic option. Switch 2 is best for fans of Nintendo exclusives or those willing to leap into a new console ecosystem, which is fundamentally not true, because if you're a fan of Nintendo exclusives, ironically enough, the Steam Deck has way more Nintendo exclusives than the Switch 2 does because of emulation. With the Steam Deck, you have N64, SNES, NES, 3DS, DS, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Wii, Wii U, GameCube, and so much more besides that. So ironically enough, the Steam Deck is a better option if you're a fan of Nintendo exclusives. Thankfully, if you did own the original Switch, your game library is backwards compatible both digitally and physically. Again, the exact same thing can be applied to the Steam Deck. If you have a Steam library, you can download it. It's backwards compatible because obviously backwards compatibility isn't really a thing on PC. Also, pretty funny how you don't mention the fact that you have to pay to get the graphical upgrades for games that you already own on the Switch 2. It's pretty funny that you leave that part out. Nintendo Switch 2's most exciting new feature is its Joy-Con function as mice. Again, I find it funny how you're saying its exciting new feature is you can use a mouse with it, which is something that you can already do with the Steam Deck. The Switch 2's exciting new feature is something that the Steam Deck can already do, and has been able to do for the last 3 years. Please try again. Steam Deck does something similar with its 2 trackpads, but they don't emulate the mouse experience quite as well. Okay, so literally just put a fucking mouse on the Steam Deck. Like, there are adapters that you can use. Just plug a fucking USB mouse into the Steam Deck if it's such a big hassle to you. Whilst not new to the Switch 2, its detachable Joy-Con docking station and backstand offers handheld, tablet, and docked modes. Literally all of those features except the Joy-Cons are usable for the Steam Deck. And the Joy-Con wasn't even invented with the Switch 2. Like, it's a feature that's brought back from the Switch 1. But also, I find it funny that you're hyping up backstand and detachable controllers. Meanwhile, IGN in a previous article literally said that every single controller is compatible with the Steam Deck. Like, I feel like that is more impressive and much more valuable than having detachable controllers, especially since the Switch 2 didn't even invent detachable controllers. I can't talk about Switch 2's features without bringing up Game Chat, Nintendo's solution to online communication with its own dedicated C button. Not only can you video chat with friends whilst playing games, but the console has a built-in microphone. Players can even stream their gameplay to one another. Certain games have built-in functionality for a Nintendo Switch 2 camera peripheral, where games like Super Mario Party can place an image of your face next to your character. However, a Nintendo Switch Online membership will be required to use Game Chat after March 31st, 2026. Literally everything you just said, you just acknowledged you have to pay for with the Switch 2. Like, it's fucking funny that Nintendo do this. Like, for the first 9 months it's free, but then after that you have to pay for these features. And these are features that you don't have to pay for on the Steam Deck. Like, you can get Discord working on the Steam Deck if you really want to. Comparatively, Steam Deck is feature light. It's a dedicated handheld machine primarily focused on playing games available on Steam. However, it gains the additional benefit of an enormous software library. Whereas Switch 2 titles will need direct ports, Steam Deck owners will have access to a wider variety of games. Yes, that's literally emulation. Like, you can play basically any game from any era on the Steam Deck. Especially since emulation is easier than ever on the Steam Deck because of EmuDeck. I'm fairly certain playing any game from any previous era is more important for the consumer of video games than whatever bullshit you brought up for the Nintendo Switch 2. Especially since you have to pay for those features. Switch is the champion of form factor versatility, and the new features coming to the Switch 2 solidify that. Steam Deck pulls ahead with software diversity, but the inventiveness of the Switch 2 is impressive. Winner, Switch 2. So let me get this straight. You have the Steam Deck, where you can play any game from any era, not just Steam games, because obviously emulation is incredible. It's a handheld gaming PC, as well as technically a games console. You have access to mod support, as well as modding tools that can get you better performance from your games. And it has easily the most versatility of any handheld ever with the optional extras. Whereas Nintendo Switch 2 is literally just another Nintendo Switch, bringing back things like Joy-Cons and paying to play your games online, and its only new features are magnetic Joy-Cons and game chat that you have to pay for. You really haven't done a good job representing the Switch 2 here. The winner is the Nintendo Switch 2. Are you surprised IGN chose the Nintendo console? Is it premature to award the crown to a console that isn't out yet? Maybe, but the Nintendo Switch 2 is shaping up to be a phenomenal machine, surpassing the Steam Deck in versatility of features and graphics performance. You literally said earlier you have no idea how good the performance is going to be until you have it. And now you are certain all of a sudden that it is going to surpass the Steam Deck in graphics and performance. There is one element that the current Steam Deck is ahead in: value. Switch 2 is expensive and its software even more so. If you're concerned about game prices in the future, Steam Deck is likely your best bet. Otherwise, Switch 2 has awesome new features like Joy-Cons that can act as mice, a powerful NVIDIA SoC with DLSS support, on top of everything else that already made the Switch fantastic. It's shaping up to be the stronger choice. So let me get this straight. You said that the Steam Deck has more value than the Nintendo Switch 2, and if you're concerned about game prices and software prices, the Nintendo Switch 2 is not the platform for you. But because the Nintendo Switch 2 has theoretically better performance than the Steam Deck, as well as Joy-Cons that act like mice, the Steam Deck is a worse platform and the Nintendo Switch 2 is the one you should use. You really are desperate for Nintendo to suck your meat dry, aren't you? But anyways guys, that's all I've got for you today. I don't know what I was expecting. I mean, you can't spell ignorant without IGN after all. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to the channel and let me know what you thought about the video down below. I'll see you all in the next one and take care.